You know, there's something beautiful about this country to the rest of the world. It's always different to live in a place. You know its edges and you know its tensions. But to me, it's just a real privilege to be here. So thank you, Diocese of Hamilton, and thank you for coming to this. It's Saturday, isn't it? You could be doing something else, couldn't you? But you've come to this, and what I want to say is my job, God bless you, over the next few hours is I want you to walk out of this beautiful cathedral at mid-afternoon saying, I'm really glad I came. Is that all right? Yeah, you don't care really, do you? I know what you... So look, that's my sort of map for today. 3 sessions interspersed with a bit of conversation, with lunch, with some question and answer opportunities and so on. But really, the big deal is to ask you to relax. All right? I go all over the world doing this. Forgive me, it's a privilege. And one of the things that I know is the first thing we have to do if this is going to work. Well, there's a couple of things, really. One of the first things is, could we just pretend we like each other? And could you imagine we've been out for a drink and we enjoyed the conversation and put down all that who is he or who am I or whatever. And then the second thing is just to say, look, catechesis, God bless you, catechists. They're the closest group to my heart in the church. I love catechists. It's not because you're better than other people or holier than them. The reason I love you as a group is that you have a certain courage. Because in England, you see, where I'm from, we have a tendency to wear our faith on the inside. It's precious, it matters to us, it's dear to us, but here's our problem in England. I don't know whether it's true in New Zealand, but in England it has become deeply personal, and it was never meant to be. So people talk about their faith a little bit like it's an operation they've had. Do you know, a little bit like when people will say, well, it's... And I'll say, I'm sorry, and they'll go, well, my faith is very personal. And I'll say personal. Personal. There's a part of your faith that is only for you. It's like your fingerprint, but it's not meant to be private. And the difference between catechists and the rest of our communities is somewhere something happened to you that taught you a great truth, and I want you to know what it is. You know this already, by the way. The great truth of catechesis is very simple. If you want to learn something, give it away. Or, put another way, if you want something to reach you, teach it. You know, don't you, that something in this ministry bears truth upon your own soul, and you go, oh, it's almost as if it wakes you up. When I think, look, can we just be really clear? I'm just going to skip. I have massively over-prepared this. Have you ever done that when you lead in things? So you'll see some slides up there and I'll skip over them. Just a little thing. There's a few people in the room who will be anxious about remembering what we're going to learn today. If you like the slides, the last slide has my email address on it. You simply email me and I send you all the slides as a PDF. Now that's important to anybody who wants to remember, all right? I don't do handouts because I think I've killed too many trees giving handouts to people who don't read them, all right? So forgive me if you're not super IT literate, but just nudge somebody who is and say, look, I'd like those slides, and they'll email me and I'll send them to you. Is that okay? Yeah. Get on with it. All right, so I'm just going to move swiftly on. So look, this is my family. Forgive me, Alison was going to be with us this morning. Alison is here, by the way. That's my wife at the back. But she woke up at 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon because we're still in English time. And so we're kind of still a bit jet-lagged by it all. But these people have taught me an important truth in my life. That's Sam, he's our eldest, he's in the white T-shirt. Matthew is in the black T-shirt and Emily's sitting on the top there. That's my family. And just a stupid little truth before we begin with this, and it goes a little bit like this. About this sort of adventure for me began about 20 years ago. I get a letter from an archbishop in Los Angeles, and I'm very pleased because it says on there, would you come and lead a couple of seminars for us? And I'm in my little parish in England, and I'm thinking, oh, California. All right then. You know, when the Lord leads you to California. It's very seductive, right? You get to Orange County, Anaheim, all right? When I get there, I've brought 50 handouts with me because where I come from, I think, I'm going to find out today, the church is very similar to New Zealand. So where I come from, a seminar is normally about 30 people, and a conference, if it works really well, is probably about 120 people, something like that. When I got there were 30,000. 1,000 of them had chosen my seminar. What do you do with 50 handouts then? It was so stupid, and I'm standing in front, I'm in an arena, all right? It's a basketball arena, and for the final keynote, and there are 8,000 people in front of me, I didn't know it was being live streamed. The first time in my life. Now, here's the weird thing. I think you'll understand this. I'm standing in front of 8,000 people. I can't see anybody. They're shining spotlights onto my face. It's total darkness. Have you ever done that? Anybody who's ever acted or done any drama will know what this is like. So you're speaking to darkness. You know the people are there, but you can't see them. There's no eyes, nothing. And I'm standing in front of all these people, and I'm giving my talk, hoping, praying it's working. And then in front of me on the lectern is my phone, and my phone is there to keep me to time, the clock. And up pops a text, and it's from Sam in the white T-shirt. And it just reads, Dad, we're watching you. Now, can I just ask you to picture the scene for a minute? Does it make sense to you when I say, I'm now more distracted by that one text than 10,000 people? You know, now this is a truth around catechesis is quite interesting. You know, now I'm speaking to my son, who knows me. All right? And God bless you, you only know the speaker. And he knows me. He knows what I'm like on a bad day. He knows the truth about David Wells, all right? And I'm distracted by him. That's not the story. This is the story, and it's beautiful, and it's about catechists. The next text pops up. It's about 2 minutes later. Same boy. He's a lot younger then. And it just pops up, and it goes, Dad, comma, you're an idiot. Now, when St. Paul calls him, uses the phrase, foolishness for Christ, there's a certain foolishness that you subscribe to when you agreed to be a catechist, and it goes like this. You've overcome your own inadequacy and foolishness to bear the truth of Jesus Christ to another. Nobody is saying you're holier than they are. All right? But most of your fellow Catholics, they still think they have to be holier, cleverer, and super Catholic before they can be a catechist. And what that does is it prevents them from bearing witness to the truth. Do you know what I love about you? I don't know how you managed it, but you got over that. Nobody here is pretending that they're better than the smallest of children. You know, Bishop Steve showed us that this morning. We held up a child and we go, no, be very careful, David Wells. Remember the message of Ash Wednesday. You walk up in front of a room full of people and you have ash rubbed into your face. Why? To remind David Wells that he's not holier, cleverer, superior. I don't have a range of things to tell you that you don't know already. What I want to do is to say the reason I'm here is because I enjoy it. Is that all right? And all I want for you to do today is we will explore some issues today, but I want you to enjoy being a catechist this morning. That's the introduction over. Is that all right? So look, forgive me, this is not a gimmick. It's not a gimmick, please. Do you mind just saying to you, look, if I put it like this, back home, do you know, we could do with some English words. Catechist is a rich word, but the tragedy of the word catechist is that the first session has to be, what does it mean? You know, it's not great to go on a course where you have to find out what the title of the course means. All right, and so we have a Catholic language and a tradition and a culture that's imbibed in a certain set of traditions that go back centuries, and yet here, for most people, they're sort of bewildered by it. So today, we're going to look at a little bit around these three sacraments, but we're also much more, I hope, going to focus on our attitudes, our movements, and our dispositions. All that will make sense in a minute. And lastly, just to say, like, let's just start where we are. So our attitudes. Now, I don't know whether this is true in New Zealand, so one of the things you're here to do this morning is test it. I'm going to offer you some wisdom that's not mine, it's gathered from the church in England, but it might not be true here. So you're here to, in a way, say, well, that's kind of like it is here, or you might say, no, we're different to that, and both would be good. So look, here's the problem back in England, and I don't know whether this is the problem in New Zealand. By means of a diversion, writes Blaise Pascal, a man can avoid his own company 24 hours a day. Do you know what the enemy of the sessions are in England? They're not atheism or materialism or secularism. The problem we've developed in England is our primary homily in our culture is the words, I'm busy. All right, so you say, well, can you make it next Tuesday? And they go, I'm very busy. So we meet each other socially and we say, how are you? And we only have one answer to that question. And the question is, I'm very busy. And then you say, oh, I'm sorry to hear you're very busy. And they say, how are you? And you say, well, actually, I'm very busy as well. And then we enter, this is how mad the English are, we enter into a subtle who's busiest contest. And you know, it kind of becomes a little bit kind of curious. We wonder why we can't get more volunteers. And the answer is, I'm very busy. I'm very busy. Oh, and so what happens is, you know, that becomes the primary homily in England. We are terrified in England of not being busy. And we even think a successful parish is busy. And you go, do you know something? Back home, that's the last thing we need. You walk into church and you get offered another job. Now, here's the strangest of things. When it comes to the primary homily, what happens to people if your primary homily is, I'm very busy? If people walk into our churches and they meet busy, what happens to people? Well, there's two groups in the scriptures who suffer if you're very busy. The first group is the people you love, and the second group is the poor. You know, when I was a child, they taught me Luke chapter 10, the parable of the Good Samaritan. Do you remember? And we were taught that as, you know, be very careful who your heroes are. They may well come from the groups that don't sound like you, look like you, or believe you. And that was a good homily. But there's another homily. Why are the Levite and the priest unable to see the man in the ditch? They're not bad people. Jesus wasn't against priests and Levites. Supposing one of our primary problems is not disbelief but distraction, that we build a world up in ourselves that's so busy we miss the point. I'm just asking you, is that possible? I met a woman a couple of years ago, and she said to me, my husband's retiring this summer. And I said, oh, you must be very pleased. And she looked at me, and she went, I am not. And I thought, how can you not be pleased about your husband retiring? Listen to this. I don't know whether this is English. I don't know whether it would ever happen in New Zealand. But she said to me, amazing words. Are you ready? She said to me, what am I going to do with him? Now, just hold that thought for a minute, right? They've given their lives to each other. They lived together for 35 years. He's going to retire and she's terrified. And the reason she's terrified is she's lost sight of who he is without his job. Now, our 3 children have left home now. Emily left 2 years ago. And we had to rediscover each other, me and Ali. It was almost like we had to start dating again. We were looking at each other and she was going, who the hell are you? And I said, well, I was their dad, and I was sort of around, but we were pretty busy, weren't we? And do you know, honestly, there was a tiny element of awkwardness in it. I don't know who you are now. This woman I married is not the woman I'm married to. And I love you dearly. And God willing, we will walk together to eternity, God willing. But do you know something? We've got to fall in love again, because we've just had 25 years of being busy. It's not a bad thing, but in the church it's fatal. And I'm going to show you in a minute how both Pope Benedict and Pope Francis have both alluded to the risk of becoming so busy that we miss the point. We so devote ourselves to how we do what we do that we forget why we're doing it. And I've got to tell you, folks, I learned how to be a Catholic a long time before I learned why I was one. And that's caused tremendous problems for the church. We've got congregations full of people who know how to be a Catholic, but they don't know why they're one. And that's where you come in, and that's where you are so exciting. And thank you for being a catechist, because back home, there's an awful lot of this going on. Do you meet it? I don't know whether it's true in New Zealand, but we've got lots of people, you know, we gather in church meetings, and do you know what we do back home? This is how mad we are. We moan. We are Easter people. We're children of the light, and we get together in church meetings and moan about the church. You go, well, how attractive is that? Oh, come on, let's go to this meeting. They do a lot of moaning there. We have a lot of this, people just feeling tired and weary, and am I doing it well enough, and what's it like? And I wish I hadn't told Father I'd do this, and why did I volunteer? And we have quite a lot of this. Do you have a lot of any of this? And do you know something? Do you know that your life has a happy ending? Do you know that? I keep going to church meetings, and it's as if people are talking as if the church is dying. The church has been persecuted for 2,000 years. You go to some meetings and you'd think it was all right 30 years ago and now it's dead. And you go, hang on a minute. We were persecuted in every generation. There were tensions in the church going back to the whole Council of Jerusalem begins with problems. What are we going to do with these people who are not circumcised? I mean, thank God they sorted that one out. But there's been tensions ever since. But we sometimes believe it's just now. And so, as an Easter people, we should live with hope written on our faces. And people should come into our churches and meet the great virtues of confirmation, particularly, may I suspect, joy. Now, when was the last time you said, we've got to get to that meeting, it's full of joy? What we need is more meetings. And, of course, there's this. I'm very busy. When was the last time you sought help from a very busy person? Oh, do you know what I need? I need to meet somebody who's got a lot to do and ask them for help. Now, think about what your primary homily is. I don't mean coming out of your mouth. I mean on your face. 2 primary homilies of Pope Francis. He mentions joy in Evangelii Gaudium 109 times. Joy. It's interesting, he calls it the joy of the gospel. That's not an accident. Later on, he's going to write an exhortation, Gaudete et exultate, rejoice and be glad. 2 primary homilies of Pope Francis, cheer up and tell your face. Now, honestly, the first is joy and the second is mercy. Your joy isn't for you anyway. If you don't smile, if you don't give it away, then who is going to be attracted to the words that you have? Cheer up and tell your face. Great homilies from Pope Francis. We'll look at them this afternoon. So look, just very briefly, forgive me, I'm not going to talk at you for a whole hour. Just with the person next to you, it's not a gimmick. We are the body of Christ. All right? So we're going to say hello to each other. I know you know the person next to you. There will be an opportunity in a minute to move if you don't like the person sitting next to you. And this is not a gimmick, honestly, but just with the person next to you, would you just say, how is it going this year with the catechetic? Do you identify with any of those boxes? Do any of those go, yeah, do you know, I think we come over a bit like that sometimes? Or would you look at that screen and say, actually, I've heard what he said, but actually, we're really lucky. I'm buzzing. I'm loving it. I can't wait to do more. And actually, the whole thing is labelled with joy, and it's not like that at all. I'm not asking you to agree with it. I'm almost asking you, how are you in your ministry? Have you come here looking for a bit more enthusiasm? Have you come here looking for a bit more joy? Have you come here looking for a bit more hope or a bit more information? Or have you come here just thinking, I've come here because I've been asked to, and I'm very busy. It's all right. It's okay to be any of those. But just with the person next to you, say good morning, ask them how they are, and just say, does that speak to the church in New Zealand, or are you in a different place? You've got 3 minutes, that's all. Say hello and have a go at that, would you? Look, today's source materials are mainly the 5 exhortations of Pope Francis, but we're also going to include particularly Deus Caritas Est, the first exhortation of Pope Benedict. One of the things, just to be clear, some of you may be familiar with these documents. It doesn't make you a bad catechist if you're not. All right? I am in the privileged position that this is how I live. All right? So that means I have time to read these documents. And I don't just read them once, I read them several times. And that doesn't make me holier than you. All right? What that just does for me is it means that you stop, you begin to, when you read a document several times, let's say you've had an email or a letter and it matters to you, and you read it once, and you get a particular impression from something that's written there, and then you read it again and you realised it's nuanced slightly differently because of what came before the bit that in. And then you read it a third time and you begin to get a better thread. So I read these documents over, and what I'm going to offer you now is some reflections on what Pope Francis and Pope Benedict and St. John Paul II actually said often. Now, you know the difference. Many of you are parents. If I asked your children, what's your phrase? What do you say often? All right, they'd all be able to quote you. You do know that, don't you? And if for those of you who don't have children, if I said just throw it back to your own parents, what did your dad or your mum say often? You'd probably be able to find phrases. Sometimes they come out your own mouth. All right? Now, popes do that too, and you begin to get an impression of what matters to a person because they say it often. And what matters to this pope, and forgive me, I'm not going to be caught out by this because it's really important. We have what we call a hermeneutic of continuity, all right? What you do is you go after the popes and you look and you notice threads that run between them. Pope Benedict says this too in Deus Caritas Est, that the primary purpose of the church, her vocation, is to bring joy to the world. That's Pope Benedict. The primary vocation of the church is to bring joy to the world. Now, for Pope Francis, he laments that sometimes this joy is lacking, and therefore we need to pray to the Holy Spirit for a revival of the virtues. If the world is going to listen to the church in the third millennium, it will listen to her because it meets her virtues. All right? Now, forgive me, that's why it sounds glib and it isn't. Cheer up and tell your face is part of the mission of the church. All right? It's not glib. Let's have a little look at this because I hope you'll enjoy it. In Amoris Laetitia, the joy of love, you notice you begin to get these echoes through these documents. We begin to notice something quite interesting, and Bishop Steve did this for us in his homily. Pope Benedict and Pope Francis both do this at the beginning of their exhortations. Are you ready? They do an interesting thing, usually in chapter 1, occasionally in chapter 2. In Laudato Si and Amoris Laetitia, it's in chapter 2, and it goes a little bit like this. Are you ready? It goes, sometimes we have to unlearn in order to learn. All right? Now let's just please don't mishear this. But if I went back to your childhood and I said to you, look, as adults now, even though hopefully the people who taught you loved you, you would probably be able to say some things you learnt, you needed to unlearn. It doesn't make the people who taught you bad. It just means that we grew up sometimes with not the best of advice. Okay? Now, most of us could find something in there somewhere that's a bit like this. The process is not unusual. Psychiatrists, psychologists, sociologists, theologians all adopt this process. It just says, can we just go back and say, was that good for us? Was that good news? Some of that? Now, Jesus does it. Have a look in Matthew chapter 5. I call this the But I Tell You chapter. I love this chapter because what he's doing there is he's trying to help people to unlearn. Now, you've known this because you've seen it before. You've heard it said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anybody who murders is subject to judgment. But I tell you, I want you to look at things a different way to the way you were taught. I'd like you to look at things just differently. It doesn't mean what you were taught was wrong. I just want you to reconsider. You know, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, is unlearning what they know. And Bishop Steve did it for us this morning by saying to us, you know, sometimes you have heard it said, a child should be seen and not heard. But I tell you, let the children come to me. You see, he did it naturally in his homily. Now, you know, look, sorry, I do this, right? My Emily, she's 21. She was 4 years old. Four. And she came up to me and she went, Dad, here's a church, here's a steeple, open the doors and here are the people. And I said, that's lovely, Emily. I used to play that. She says, I've made my own up. And I thought, oh, no. She went, here's a church, here's a steeple, open the doors, and here are the people. And then she went, shh, to her fingers. Shh. Now, you have heard it said, a child should be seen and not heard. But I say to you, now, look, she was 4 years old. I believe she has a divine origin and an eternal destiny. I believe that God gave her to me and Alison to love into adulthood. She's not mine. And by the time she was 4, I'd taught her that the primary message of her Creator was to gather in a room and sit still and be quiet. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not into coming into Mass on roller skates. This is not a liberal agenda. But by the time you've taught a child that the one time that she's to say nothing and be nothing in a room of people, you can be pretty sure that if she honours that, she'll leave by the time she's 14. You have heard it said, a child should be seen and not heard. But I say to you, let the children come to me. Do you know, back at home, we've had 2 millenniums of the Catholic Church now. We still don't quite know what to do with children at Mass. Not really. You know, you go into any church in England and that child is wandering up the aisle. And half the congregation are going, oh, isn't that lovely? To see the children and the families here, isn't that beautiful? And the other half are going, will somebody please control that child? It doesn't make us bad people, it makes us human people. But what Jesus did in the first half of all the synoptic gospels is encourage people to unlearn some of the blocks that they'd picked up unwittingly in their efforts to be devout. It didn't make the devotion wrong. Please. You have heard it said parents don't care about the sacraments, they care about rugby practice. But I say to you, in joy of love, families are not a problem, they are first and foremost an opportunity. Do you see what happens back home in England? We've judged people before they've walked through the door. Oh, you put rugby first, do you? You go, well, probably they have, yeah. But is that a good starting point for the joy of the gospel? So what Pope Francis does is he says, I'm not here to change the rules. I'm just asking you, is it possible that the first thing we've done unconsciously, subconsciously, unwittingly is learnt to moan about the very people we're here to love? Now, this is back home. I'm not saying you do this. Or how about this one? You've heard it said people won't commit themselves anymore. But I say we can no longer be like a factory churning out courses that for the most part are poorly attended. This is Pope Francis in Amoris Laetitia just saying, do you know something? Have we turned people into something that they can't be before they've arrived? And then wonder why the week after First Communion they don't bring their children back. And is our answer to that, well, there you go then, you see, it just shows you I was right all the time. And you go, oh, do you know, did we not miss a point, a trick, a skill? Is there not something that should we not be going underneath that? So just take a look at these 2 owls, will you? The owl on the left, by the way, neither of these owls are bad. Can I just be clear about that? But I like working in metaphors, all right? The owl on the left I call same as it ever was owl. All right? Now, this is a good owl, all right? It's in you. And this owl remembers before we had computers, when people climbed trees and played in the summer sun. And you go, no, you didn't. It's interesting for us back home in England, same as it ever was, owl, is you when you say, in my day, as if it's not today. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You go, well, that's not great either, really. Education is all about breaking things and mending them. I came across a sign in Newark International Airport. It was quite interesting. It just sort of said, we're sorry about the construction work. We're tearing down yesterday to make way for tomorrow. And you go, oh, don't do that. Don't burn grandparents. All right, the church has a memory. So same as it ever was, owl, it isn't a bad owl. It's a good owl. But you've also got this other owl, and it's also in you, and it goes, ooh. And this owl is you when it dawns on you that there might be another way of seeing things. That perhaps occasionally we've been trapped into doleful laments about the way things were and have forgot that we've become habitualized. It doesn't make us bad people, but what Pope Francis will say is it will dull your senses. You'll cease to see. And then you'll become what Herman Lombard's once called a champion of the familiar. It wouldn't make you a bad person, but the tension between those 2 owls is alive in every parish. And they're both beautiful and they're both valued, but you don't ditch one for the other. The problem for Pope Francis is that all has got a bit lost and needs to re-find itself, because there's a joy in the church that we need to rediscover. Nearly done. I'm keeping my eye on the time, and we've got a quarter of an hour to go. Is that all right? Just so you know, I know. So 2 things to unlearn in 15 minutes. Just see how you feel about this. Number 1, the domestic church is broken, it's not bad. All right, back home in England, we're having to rethink our catechetics, particularly around the sacrament of penance, because people are not going. And we've misunderstood to some extent. We've evaluated this we've got 22 dioceses in England and Wales. I'm working quite closely with quite a few of them on this at the moment. But one of the things we're reconsidering is simply this, that actually it's the home that's struggling, back home in England, I mean. And we are evaluating our sacramental programmes by the loyalty and the response of the children who are don't have the authority or the power to respond anyway. In other words, if you want children to sustain what they experience with you, you've got to meet the parents. Because it's the parents who are deciding. Now forgive me, I know you know this, but it goes like this. We've took a long, hard look at our catechetical programmes, and we've asked ourselves, are they working? And by and large, don't take this the wrong way, but they're not. We get perhaps a response rate of about maybe 20%, and of those 20%, you can be pretty sure they were committed before the programme anyway. So what we're discovering is that even though catechetics isn't necessarily the sole domain of evangelisation, we're largely offering catechetics to people who don't know Jesus. They know about him, they just haven't met him. So the question becomes, who are you going to work with most closely if you want to help that child? And back home in England, we've decided that the work has to focus on parental involvement. Really what we're doing is evangelising the parents through the children. We've got children now bringing their mums and dads to Mass. How cool is that? Not everywhere, not all the time, occasionally, but enough to get excited about it. Look, this is research, fairly recent from the States, but it's also from Europe. It doesn't apply to New Zealand, but I want you to tell us if it does. 2 pieces of research. Firstly, Going, Gone by Bob McCarty. He's done some research through St Mary's Loyola in the United States. They questioned 10,000 young people who'd left the Catholic Church. The first serious piece of research about people who've left. And then we also have this work by Stephen Bullivant in England. It's done something similar in Europe. I won't go through it all with you, but just very briefly, it goes a little bit like this. It may not be true here, so forgive me. Firstly, the median age of young people leaving the church in Europe and North America is 13. That's the median age. It means a lot of them are leaving before that. Okay? 23% of the young people leaving the church in North America and Europe had left by the time they were 10. Now don't get depressed about this. It's going to be all right. Turns out we're an Easter people. 13% said they'd consider coming back. Now that's interesting for us because we were kind of consoling ourselves on the basis, oh well, they'll come back when they want to get married, they'll come back when they have families, but actually the evidence isn't there really. In fact, back home, rates of marriage are really falling now, and that's more to do with house prices than anything else. People can't afford to have a house unless they live with somebody, and they get together before they get married. And then they have children before they get married, and then they don't get married. But they live together for a lifetime. It's very odd. If you grew up like I did, where you did it in a different order. But here's the more interesting stuff for me. There was no clear, consistent reason why young people were leaving the church. Nothing surfaced above everything else. And I hope reassuringly, the scandals, the personality of the priest, or church teaching did not feature as significant reasons. Now, I think we tend to blame those things very easily. But in actual fact, I hope that's some encouragement to the clergy here. Turns out to be not your fault. A lust! Behaviour of parents turned out to be hugely significant. Now, before we start berating parents, I'm not going to do that. But the second thing was the behaviour of the community. Now, what do those last two mean? Well, the first thing is they're watching their parents closely to ask the question, do you believe what they're telling us? Do you believe what they're telling us? And the second thing is, when I get to Mass, do these people look like they want us here? So, you can have the finest programme with the most skillful sessions, with the most detailed catechesis, but those two issues, do mum and dad believe what they're telling us? And number two, does the community look like they want us here, turn out to be the most significant factors? Does anybody care whether I'm here or not? The single biggest factor appears to be whether the parents are allowing their faith to influence their behaviour. Does it make any difference in the home? And you can be pretty sure that if you run a programme, and it does, the child is going to buy into it. And if you run a programme and it doesn't mean the child won't, but it's harder for the child. That's all. It's a bigger struggle. Now, please don't get too anxious about this, because later on in the day, we're going to say, so what does the church say to a situation where mum and dad is not evangelised? They're bringing their children to your programmes. They know they want them for them, but they don't know why they want them. Isn't that gorgeous? They want you to do something for their child, but they don't know why. Now, for Pope Francis, that's stunningly beautiful. So we're not going to berate these parents. We're going to say, that's amazing. Okay. The second thing to unlearn back home in England is this. We've got a bit of a messed up idea about conversion. Do you know, back in England, we use the word convert to mean somebody who's become a Catholic. So people will say, oh, I'm a convert. And you go, oh, that's good, well done. Now, have you ever met evangelical Christians? So I don't know whether they do this over here, but sometimes they say to me, yes, David, but are you saved? Do you ever get that question? Yes. Are you saved? What's the Catholic answer? I love the fact that most of you don't know. It's kind of interesting when evangelical Christians, because one of the things they have is they have a great sense of their Christian birthday. The Lord came into my life, and they'll often give you a date and a time and a moment. You go, wow, that's fantastic, all right? That's amazing. The Catholic Church's teaching, I love this, is you say, are you saved, to a Catholic? And a Catholic's response is, Now, in actual fact, that's correct. Because it goes a little bit like this. If you look at Et Unum Sin, Pope John Paul II's teaching on Christian unity, he said, firstly, he asked the church to pray for his conversion, and he's the Pope, which I think is stunning. And then the second thing, which I think is also beautiful, is he does this. He says, conversion is both a moment and a lifetime. Now, that's why, it's one of the reasons I'm a Catholic. I love my evangelical brothers and sisters because they remind me how to cheer up. All right? But I love our depth. And our depth goes like this. David Wells, you are saved, but he hasn't finished saving you. All right? Thank God, because I don't want to look at myself now and think he's finished, because I know how weak and stupid I am. So what I want him to do is, I want to believe, Lord, continue the work you began. All right? It's in the epistles. Continue the work you began so it comes to a full completion. Probably, God willing, when I finally meet my eternal destiny, I'll know that I am saved. And by the way, I am going to heaven. So are you. And it's not because of me, by the way, it's up there. I am going to heaven. But I haven't finished converting. Now look, back home in England, nearly done. Some popular misconceptions, which often give catechists a bit of a cold. Number one, you present yourself at the door of the church. Number two, you look inside to see if what is in there is agreeable to you. Number three, someone who is inside will explain what it all means. Number four, you give your assent, remain static or walk away. Number five, walking in is understood as conversion. Once inside, you are converted. To walk out after coming in is to be lapsed. To be inside is to see outsiders as in error. The difference with outsiders is considered greater than the similarity. Now, forgive me, this may not be a problem in New Zealand, but in England we judge people by whether they go to Mass or not. And we go, that's actually not the Catholic Church's teaching on conversion. Now, if I want to be part of the body of Christ, I need to be fully initiated into the community. But conversion begins a long time before that and continues a long time afterwards. And that's why, deep down inside, you know that some of the most annoying people in your lives go to Mass. In all of my prayers for all of you, writes St. Paul, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now, being confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. Now look, my dad is a man of great faith, spent his life on building sites, a man of few words. I was really blessed. I had a mum who loved the scriptures and a dad who loved my mum. Now, that doesn't make me better than anybody else, but I was lucky. And on his deathbed, he was scared. And he was lying and he was looking at me and he was saying, Dave, he was in the parachute regiment. He used to jump out of aeroplanes in the army in the 1950s. And he said to me, I've got one last jump to make. He said, and this time they're not giving me a parachute. And I'm scared because I don't know. I just hope that it was all true. So conversion can't be a straight line. And these parents that are coming to our sessions, they're just fragile, hopeful, scared, confused, and busy. Now, I love what you're doing in this diocese. I spent a bit of time with this, with Hearts Burning. And I love it for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons I love it is it's very in tune with this notion of conversion as a process of accompaniment. It's gentle, takes time, you have to be careful with people. And then I go on your website and I think, why am I coming to New Zealand? They're doing all this. But we're having to encourage back home a gentle, progressive idea that you accompany somebody through conversion. It's done gently. And Pope Francis details it in Amoris Laetitia. And this powerful icon of accompaniment is actually in the sacristy here. It says, Jesus the accompanier. You know, we take people one step at a time, which is why I'm going to skip all this and maybe just finish with a couple of stories about how this works. I told you I'd massively over-prepared this, but if we don't get this right, the sacrament of confession, reconciliation, penance is going to be abstract for people. All right? When I was a child, they taught me sin by giving me a list of sins. All right? It wasn't a bad idea. I didn't know how to concretize what sin is. So they taught me. I was disobedient to my parents. I was distracted at Mass. I mean, they were helpful. They gave me something. But when I went to confession, I just said those things, even though I hadn't. I hadn't been disobedient to my parents, so I was actually lying in the confessional. I just didn't know that at the time, right? But it was a rubric. It was helping me to enter into this ritual. All right, now I go to the sacrament and I say, Father, I don't even know what the word is for this. I just know inside my stupidity is a man who wants to be a better dad, I want to be a better husband. I want to be a better man. I don't even know when I'm not being, but I know I'm not being. I can't put that into an incident or an objective moment. Some sin is like that, but an awful lot is me just being weak and stupid. So, Father, I'm here again because I'd like to be stronger than I am. I'd like to have more courage, more joy, more of those things. Now, how do you get from one to the other? This is my mum and dad with my kids 3 years ago, and a lot of the answer is gently. When I was a little boy, I'd lie in bed, and when my mum was going to bed, do you know what she used to do? She used to come into our bedrooms, right? Me and my brother and my sister in the other room, and she'd come in and she used to do this. Are you ready? She used to lean over our beds. She thought we were asleep. Right? And she'd lean over our beds and she'd put a little cross on her forehead. Just like that. Good night, God bless. She thought we were asleep. She did that for 18 years. It was rather embarrassing when you're 17. And then we had Sam. And we took him home. And she never said to me, by the way, David, there's a reason I'm signing you with the sign of the cross. I'm just going to offer you a brief catechesis on it now. The main reason is that it goes back to the early church, and most people were slaves, and they were emblazoned or marked with a particular sign. And the early Christians, they used to mark themselves with the sign of the cross. It comes from a particular time of slavery and so on. She didn't do all that. She just used to do it. One day, I'm putting my son to bed. He's 2 days old. I lean over the cot, and I find myself putting a cross on his head. And I go, oh, I get it. You terrify me. You are the most precious thing in my life. When you were born, I just looked at you and loved you, and I had no reason why. I don't know why I love you. You haven't passed any tests. You're lying in my hands, and you scare me. When you're awake, I want you to go to sleep, and when you're asleep, I prod you because I think you're dead. And I put this baby in a cot, and I find myself putting a cross on his forehead because why? Because, Lord, this child terrifies me, and he's yours. Now, that's accompaniment. It doesn't come in a moment. It comes in a lifetime. And if we're going to help parents, we've got to understand accompaniment as a gentle process of understanding where healing comes from.